Hi there, I'm Philip Heidson, the founder of Art of Procurement. And at Art of Procurement, we help procurement professionals like you plan and deliver change with confidence. Whether it's through the mapping and prioritization of your change journey, securing the subject matter expertise that you need to help you along the way, or assisting you and your team to take action on what they learn, and what's really important is on also what they already know. And of course, a big part of what we do is this weekly podcast where we share strategies and tactics that aim to inspire and help elevate your change journey. I want to thank you for joining me today. Let's go straight into the show. Hi there everybody, and welcome to episode 235 of The Art of Procurement. And I'm joined today by Sarah Scudder. And Sarah is the president of the Real Sourcing Network, or RSN, and they're a company that provides clients with print management software. It allows them to manage the print category in-house. And so in our conversation, we discuss a wide range of topics, including healthy risk-taking for the sake of career development, how to make the most of modern procurement events, and print category best practices. Sarah shares her unmatched perspective on this $77 billion US industry and how procurement can leverage technology to get the best total value by combining large dominant players and smaller niche market entrants in this labor-dependent and very capital-intensive space. And so I began our conversation, which was recorded at the SIG Fall Summit back in October of last year, how she first became involved in the print category.
Well, Phil, it's an interesting story. I moved to Sonoma County, California, so about an hour north of San Francisco in wine country. And I attended Sonoma State University. I was a double major in business and economics with an emphasis in marketing. And my plan was to go into the fashion industry.
Right.
I had done some runway modeling in high school, and I wanted to actually go into the business management side and potentially have my own company producing fashion shows one day. So that had been my plan all along. Sonoma County and Sonoma State is definitely not a hub for fashion, so it was kind of an odd pursuit and choice. And I was president of my sorority, Alpha Gamma Delta, my junior year. And my senior year, I had ended my presidency term, and I had volunteered to chair a very, very large fundraising event called Lip Jam. It was a Greek philanthropic event, and all the proceeds went to diabetes. And putting on that event and having a full schedule, I decided I need to get some outside help in regards to coordinating the printed material and logistics for the event. So I found a company called Golden Pacific Systems. They were a local print management firm, and I outsourced all of our print work to them for the event. Promotional items, t-shirts, direct mail, all the marketing materials that went along with making the event a success. And after the event, and after working with them for about 2 or 3 months, they actually offered me a job.
Okay.
So I'm a senior in high school wanting to go into fashion, and here I am with this opportunity in the print space. So I had no interest in going into the print industry, or so I thought. But you never turn down an opportunity for an interview and to network and meet people. So I went in and met with the owners. It was a very small regional company. And when I left, I realized that I was an entrepreneur at heart and that someday I wanted to have my own business, and what better way to learn how to run a company than working for a small organization where you can learn customer service, ops, billing, purchasing, kind of all the components that you need to have a successful business. I also saw a huge opportunity to implement technology in a very, very traditional industry. Print, especially at that time, was pretty old school. There was not as much technology or youth infused into that category than a lot of the other things happening in the procurement world. So I decided that I was up for the challenge, and I accepted the job. So as soon as I graduated, I started. And my first month or so, I spent time really analyzing and looking at the industry, but also the business model for the company. And I went to the CEO's office with all my data and research and said, I'd like to present some alternative options for the business model. And he agreed. So I spent the first 12 months working with our team to really morph and modify us into more of a technology company in the print space, more as just selling a product based on price. And after that, we had this really good solution. I said, okay, well, I better go out and get some clients. So that's how I started in the print space. And here I am several years later, still in the print industry, more on the software technology side, but still combining my passion for procurement in the print space with the technology piece as well.
I want to touch on something about selling, because to come into a small organization, what I imagine was a family organization with a lot of new ideas, but ideas that could present a big risk if they didn't work, because you were suggesting changes to the business model. There's a lot of influencing, persuasion, and selling involved in that. How did you go about making that case and kind of demonstrating that perhaps the risk wasn't as high as what the owner or the managing director would have perceived there to be, and to kind of convince them to change or to try new ideas? Because I think that's a skill within procurement that's so important to us, and one that we sometimes miss.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think selling abilities and selling skills are becoming more and more important in procurement every day. And some of the things that I did to help build my case, I did a lot of research and really looked at the market and where the market was at that time and where I thought it was going. So pulling really good statistics and information, looking at the competitive landscape. So what were some of the other thought leaders or more progressive companies doing? And then the personal human touch as well. Talking to people in our space, talking to competitors, and really combining just that gut feeling sometimes.
Yeah.
So combining all of those three things, I built out my business model and my business case and went in and had a conversation. It wasn't a, you must do this, you have to do this. It was more of an open dialogue and asking a lot of questions. So when I was meeting with our CEO, I was really trying to get some insight as well about his personal state and where he wanted to be and where he wanted to grow over the next 3 to 5 years.
And kind of trying to align then your vision with what he's trying to achieve.
Exactly.
Now, before we started, you were telling me that this certainly isn't the first time behind a microphone for you. Explain to the listeners a little bit about your radio show.
Yes, so I was on a board a few years ago. I'm a big believer in giving back to your industry and to your community as much as possible. I think we're blessed with lots of opportunities, and it's very important to pay it forward and help others, not only motivate them, but elevate their careers as well. And one of the boards that I served on, one of our board members worked for a local radio station. It's called KSRO. And they have several different focuses, many music channels. They have the local radio talk stations, and they didn't have something that touched on career advice. And they felt that there was a big need in the Sonoma County market to provide listeners with an opportunity to be motivated, but and also to get takeaways to further their careers. Yeah. So myself and my best friend who owns a company were approached to host a radio show on Fridays, 12 to 12:30. We were live every week. And it was called Career Conversations. And our goal was to go out and find people in the community that had done incredible things in business.
Yep.
We had guests who were 70 years old, who when they were 55, the construction industry tanked and they put themselves through school and completely changed careers and became a CFO.
Yeah.
We had a lot of people on the station who had used music and their love for music to influence their career in many different industries. So lots of really interesting stories about how people combine their passion, how they dealt with change, and how they built incredible businesses that employ and inspire lots of people in the community.
What was, as you think about kind of some of the stories and some of the people that you talked to, you gave a couple of examples there, but I'd love to know if there were any things specifically like that really inspired you that perhaps you weren't expecting as part of doing that radio show, or perhaps tips that the inspiration that you took from talking to these people to actually apply to your own career.
Yeah, gosh, I think I learned more than the guests realized.
Yeah.
Two guests that stood out in particular. One of them is a really, really incredible CEO. He runs a company called Traditional Medicinals in my area, and he is someone who has this incredible skill to recruit people and give them the tools they need to excel, providing guidance when necessary, but giving them all the resources to build their own personas and their own personal brand at a larger company. And it was really interesting to hear his business model and philosophy and how he built a culture.
Kind of encouraging entrepreneurs within a company.
Correct. The other guest that really stood out was someone who had made a very, very substantial living in the music industry. And you typically hear that's not a place where there's a lot of opportunity to actually have a career. You hear musicians either struggling or having a gig on the side or just pursuing it as they can. And he had bounced around at record companies and was able to be smart enough to find opportunities that allowed him to pursue his passion at the same time. And I think a really important takeaway is whether it's procurement, whether it's sourcing, whether you're in finance, to find something that you love and incorporate that in what you do. And I think you will be happier, you'll be more productive, and I think you will do more for your company and more for yourself.
Now, I want to touch on something that, if you follow Sarah on Twitter, on LinkedIn, as I do, we're connected across social media. You can't help but see that, you go to a lot of events, you meet a lot of people. I think that networking actually comes back to what you're talking about in careers and helping people grow careers. I just love your perspective on, why you invest so much time in networking and perhaps what works for you as you do that.
Well, I have a new company, Real Sourcing Network. I saw a need in the market for a software solution in the print industry. And I think one of the best ways to build a meaningful brand is to make personal connections. Instead of trying to send emails or cold call, I think having face-to-face dialogue and being able to ask the right questions and figure out if your solution can benefit someone, I think is invaluable. And one of the best ways to do that, in my opinion, is either going to events or hosting your own. So one of the things that we've started doing, and we have a few strategic partners, is to put on our own events. So we hosted our last event in October, and it was an executive procurement roundtable. We had it in the evening, and we find really interesting people in procurement. We'll do panels, and it's a great way to bring people in the industry together to network and provide thought leadership. And I think that's really, really important. The other thing about going to conferences is I think it's important to stay current on the trends and what's happening in the industry. So I have learned so much from risk management to challenges with winning over stakeholders to how to integrate technology in a traditional organization. And those are things I probably wouldn't have learned as much about just by reading online.
It becomes more real, doesn't it? And you talk about actually meeting people. At the end of the day, we sell to humans. Everything is human to human. It's not company to company. If people want to work with you, they'll find a way within their organization to work with you most of the time. Obviously sometimes there's constraints, but if you build those personal connections, and that's exactly the same. Again, we talked before about selling procurement and the procurement and your own personal value proposition, not just procurement's value proposition, is about those personal relationships.
And it's about helping people.
Yeah.
And you may meet someone today, and in 12 months, they might be in a new role.
Yeah.
There might have been a change within their organization, and you may be able to help them down the road. Or they may have a friend or someone in their network that's looking for your solution.
No, big believer in karma. In doing the things that, helping people in the ways that you would want to be helped and would appreciate being helped by others. And that ultimately we're all kind of in this community together. And that I'm a really strong believer in, and maybe it's naive, I don't really think about competition within an industry, for example. I think about what can we do to help the entire industry. So then if we're creating more demand for what everybody does within it, it actually helps everybody.
I think the other thing that's really important is to find mentors or sponsors, people to really help you navigate, because the procurement industry, while it's very, very small in some sense, it can be scary, especially people that are new to the industry. I always like to go to conferences and talk to people that have very different backgrounds, whether it's finance or operations, and they're in procurement for the first time, and just learning about their challenges and struggles. It's very helpful if you have someone guiding you and helping you, making introductions, sending you information, checking in on you. So it's something I personally try to do, and I've always sought out mentors, and I'm lucky to have some incredible mentors in the procurement space.
Yeah, it can be very lonely if you don't have that. But also on the flip side, I've found that there are so many people, this is something that's really... I don't want to say surprised me, but just impressed me about the people that I work with through doing the podcast. So many people want to give back, like you said before. They actually want to make themselves available, where you may think that they have all this experience and they're on a pedestal and all these things. Well, at the end of the day, people just like helping people.
And I think the important takeaway is you just have to ask.
Right.
What's the worst that someone can say? No.
Right.
And if it's a no, you move on.
Yeah.
But when you ask enough, I think you'll find people that are definitely willing to help.
Well, I want to segue a little bit into the print category itself. So let's start with some basics. This may seem overly simplistic, but there'll also be some folks who are listening who have never experienced the print category. So I just wonder if you could share a little bit about what the print category looks like, kind of where it fits within a marketing perspective, and just really a little bit more about print itself.
So print is a $77 billion industry in the United States. And it historically has been an industry that's more traditional and more relationship driven. So you've got a couple major print suppliers that make up the majority of the market. Yep. And then you have a lot of regional or small print vendors or print suppliers that make up the bulk of the companies in the space. Print as a category is very, very broad. It includes marketing materials, forms, labels, packaging, creative services, direct mail. Yeah. So there's a lot of niches within the print space. It's really anything that's logoed or branded would be considered falling in the print space.
Now, when you think about the supply market within the print space, does a print shop typically specialize in one of those niches that you talk about, or is it really a generalist kind of category where a supplier will do any element of the print?
Yeah, so I would say the answer is both.
Yeah.
So in the more traditional paper print, there are more generalist suppliers. They have varying types of equipment, and they'll run a lot of materials, whether it's forms or marketing driven. Then you get into some of the more niche categories like labels. Yeah. And there are print suppliers that all they do is labels. It's a very different process, a very different type of equipment and type of material. There are companies that specialize solely in apparel. There's another large grouping of suppliers that specialize in promo. Yeah. The fastest two growing categories today in print are packaging and labels.
Okay.
And those two growth spurts are driven, in my opinion, from Alibaba, from eBay, and because of Amazon.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of more traditional companies selling products where 10 or 15 years ago, a brick and mortar was fine.
Yep.
And people came into your store, and people, you think of a traditional retailer like a Gap or, you know,
you're shipping 50 of these items in one box. It's going to the retailer, they're displaying them, and now they all need their individual packaging.
Yeah. So that's been a big shift in the category, and so there are suppliers solely specializing in packaging and labels, and I would say you've seen an increase in those two areas on the supplier side.
And is that more than made up for the decrease that you may see in, for example, direct mail?
Yeah, so the two biggest categories that have decreased are books and newspapers.
Yeah.
And again, we refer to an Amazon, and you look at like a Create Space.
Yeah.
We know our good friend Joanna Martinez and many others in the industry have recently published books.
Yep.
And a lot of people use Create Space, and it's an on-demand model, and you're not printing thousands and thousands of copies from a publisher. So while those have significantly decreased, you see a huge increase in labels and packaging, and so far it's actually been somewhat of a wash from a spend perspective, from a broad scope.
Now, I imagine it's a pretty capital-intensive business because there's a lot of equipment that a supplier has to invest in to actually be able to do the printing, and therefore they're really reliant on getting volumes to fill up that space, that capacity.
Yeah, so absolutely. Printing equipment is very expensive, and it is labor intensive. So you've got to run a staff sometimes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, depending on the job and volume. And the challenge is you have this somewhat fixed expense as your work ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a cash flow and revenue challenge for print suppliers. There is kind of two types of print. There's the offset, which is the much more traditional print. That's what we know from 100 plus years ago.
Right.
And then we have the digital print. And digital has made a huge, huge push in the last 5 years. I would say many of the companies now in the space, in the procurement industry, have made a huge shift into digital. And I would say, I mean, we've seen companies where they've transitioned 90 to 95% of what they do to digital, which allows you to do something called on demand.
Yeah.
So you're no longer running inventory, sitting it in a warehouse, and then a year from now having to deal with paying for obsolete inventory and destroying it. So it's been a huge transformation in the industry, the shift to the whole print on demand piece.
And I imagine there's a lot of suppliers are still playing catch up because they've invested in all this really expensive equipment that is based on print runs, and now you have newcomers into the market who can just go and buy printers and some computers, and there you go. I'm sure that it creates a lot of tension in the marketplace that you have these two different models and different kind of cost structures that support them.
Yeah, and what that's done to the industry is there's been a huge, huge amount of acquisitions in the last 5 years.
Right.
So you have more traditional companies that have a ton of offset equipment who have been really struggling and don't know what to do with themselves, and it's expensive to make the transition to digital, so companies are selling.
Yeah.
So there's again a few major print suppliers who have done a significant amount of acquisitions, so they're really kind of dominating and taking over the market. Or you get people who are retiring and simply exiting out of the business altogether if the selling is not an option.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately, there's definitely been a number of businesses that have closed because they haven't been able to stay current and transition to the digital, and also the technology piece, being able to provide technology solutions that go along with the print.
When I think about like an enterprise buyer of print services, we talked about the fulfillment. I see that a lot of this is about fulfillment. And it's not necessarily the business model, that they can buy into different business models, that in the back end it's fulfilled in different ways by these print shops, whether they're digital, whether they're offset. What are some of the delivery models that enterprise buyers have when they're actually looking to engage with print suppliers?
Yeah, so there's a few models in the market. I would say some organizations choose to manage their print buying internally, meaning they have their own staff and team and resources. They want to keep it in-house and they want to do it themselves. You have some of them using more standard source-to-pay or procure-to-pay solutions, which are a challenge if you're dealing with more complex or detailed print, because those solutions aren't designed specifically for printed material.
And so they would go and try and source by the job using those solutions?
Correct. So I'm sourcing a new rollout with different marketing materials, and I would log into the tool and try to
send an RFP out just for that one job.
Correct. Correct. Then you have another business model where organizations are outsourcing print procurement altogether. So people are saying, we don't want to use our team and resources for this category. It's not important enough for us. We'd rather free up our team's time to focus on more strategic categories. And then they'll work with an outsourced print management firm. And there are organizations in the industry, and that's what they specialize. They'll staff people on site, or they'll manage the buying remotely.
Right. So often if it's on site, they'll actually transition the same people who were in their own print shop to the outsourced provider, but rebadging them essentially.
Correct. And then you've got another business model, which is kind of the software model, where you have buyers in-house and you want to keep them managing the category, but they need to be more efficient and drive more savings. And then you look at software solutions that allow the team to manage the category and manage the buying more efficiently themselves internally. From a larger program perspective, there's really kind of two types of ways that people manage print projects. There's the one-offs, where things come up throughout the year. Marketing, operations, HR has a new rollout. Healthcare is a big category where there's always new regulations and materials that need to be produced and distributed to the end user or customer. And those are things where they happen once, you produce them, you ship them, and you're done. And then you've got more catalog programs where companies, whether it's a franchised organization, a bank that has multiple branches throughout the United States, an insurance company that's got agents or brokers throughout, and they need more of a catalog solution. So contract pricing is set up, and it allows the end user to go in and order more day-to-day type items off a program or catalog price.
Okay. As you think about pricing models, I'm taking a very basic example here just because it's what I use in my business. You transition from where you used to go and buy lots of ink cartridges and pay a fortune for the ink cartridges. Now you still pay a fortune, but you do it by page. And so, and they just ship me new ink cartridges every 6 months, and I don't need to worry about going and spending $150 in one time. Are the pricing models changing as well in the print space, where it's going less about what you use and more about kind of trying to make it more of a subscription model?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. So one of the biggest factors in the pricing model change is inventory. So companies used to have substantial amounts of inventory, which would really affect potentially the bottom line of the organization depending on their spend. So they would run significant amounts of product and either own the inventory up front, or the supplier would own it and do a bill of ship. But then 3 months, 6 months in, if that product's not moving, the client is going in and having a significant bill or invoice to pay for this inventory. That has really transitioned more with the print-on-demand model, where you just pay for it as you need it. Very common in the category is also, again, I mentioned before, contractor rate card pricing, where you're going to buy X amount of postcards or brochures over a year, but you don't want to buy them all at once. So you can go out and do a competitive bid and then lock in that pricing for a certain amount of time. The challenge with that recently has been the cost of paper.
Right.
There's been a big increase in the raw material and manufacturing costs for paper, which have had a big impact on companies that have a large print spend.
Mm-hmm. Now I want to talk a little bit about, so you at Real Sourcing, I'm going to edit that.
Real Sourcing Network.
Yes, that's what I was going to say, and then I stopped myself. I was
right.
like, is that really what it is?
You can say RSN too.
Yeah, so let me just make a note at the time. 27. In fact, let me, Sarah. Because what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about your model.
Okay.
And kind of what some of the drivers were behind the model that you chose. So I want to transition a little bit and talk about when we talk about options for how to engage with print suppliers. You know, there's, from a procurement perspective, there's always a model where you can do it yourself, you can outsource a lot of the responsibility.
Yeah.
You know, that's an industry that I've been heavily involved in from a more general perspective in procurement over the last few years. At RSN, I know you focused a lot more on the software side, so using software to help enable essentially supplier selection. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about, one, what that looks like, and two, you know, why was that an area where you felt there was an opportunity for you to be able to help procurement professionals?
Yeah, so I've always been a big believer in technology.
Mm-hmm.
I think technology alone doesn't drive transformation, but using technology is important in driving and implementing transformation at a company. So given that and my background in the print space, I decided I really wanted to combine the two and come up with an innovative solution for companies. So my background, I was at an outsourced print management firm. So organizations that spent, you know, a pretty substantial amount of money on print would outsource the print buying to us, and we would do it for them.
Right.
So we would either staff buyers on site or we would have buyers manage it remotely. And in that process, I saw a need for a software solution that organizations could use themselves. Mm-hmm. Not every organization is big enough, has a big enough spend to outsource the print category. And not all companies are open to it for whatever reason, whether it's compliance, whether it's culture, whether it's the business model of the executive team. It's not always an option. But print is such a decentralized category in many organizations, and it's often a challenge category because it's driven by marketing. Yeah. And marketing is not always open to working with procurement. It can sometimes be a really big challenge. And so I saw a need to develop a software solution that allowed procurement to get a win and centralize a category and make it easier and more efficient for the team internally, but also appeal to marketing and win over stakeholders. So kind of combining all those worlds, we built and introduced recently a software to the market that allows people to do that. And what the business model is, it's a monthly subscription based on the number of users, and an organization loads all their own print suppliers. So one of the challenges in working with marketing is print is a very relationship-driven category. People have very, very long-standing relationships with their printers, oftentimes local. If you look at the landscape of companies that buy a lot of print, many times it's local print suppliers that they've worked with for 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
You have hundreds of these suppliers across at least a large enterprise with a lot of different offices around the world.
Yes. So knowing that is a big challenge and something that procurement teams are going to have to overcome. Our tool was built to allow companies to set up and load all their own print suppliers. So whether someone has 2, 5, 10, 1,000, they load them all into the tool. And part of that process is loading all the equipment that the suppliers have. So really understanding what they're doing in-house versus what they're outsourcing themselves. And then the tool allows a buyer within an organization to log in, and anytime they need something new produced, whether it's a new marketing item, a new form, a brochure, a direct mail piece, they build out the job or the project, and then the tool automates a 5-bid process on every job. So it takes the company's supplier base and matches the specs from the job with the equipment that the suppliers have, and helps them identify through technology, which are best
through
suited
knowing what
for
the best
that work.
configuration of
Correct.
Size of printer or size of organization or whatever it may be is optimized for the actual print job that they want.
Correct. And then the software allows the buyer to make modifications before the final bid requests go out. So they may have a job where they want 10 bids. Our tool automates 5, but they may want more. It allows them to do that. And then it sends out a notice to the suppliers. They log into the tool, input their pricing, and then the buyer selects the bid, and then it continues on with the production process. The 3 things that were important to us to provide to clients is tracking and managing local spend, tracking and managing sustainable spend, and diversity spend. Those 3 categories are not often tracked for print because there hasn't necessarily been an easy way to do that.
Right. As not just print, it's the same for all categories. It's been very hard. I once had responsibility in an organization to track diverse spend, for example, and it was just like pulling a number out of a hat.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's so manual. It's writing it on paper, it's putting things in a spreadsheet, and that's just extra work, and it's a manual process.
Right.
So we allow organizations to really include print in any of these larger classifications in a very simple and seamless way. Some of our clients are in very regulated industries, and they need to spend a certain amount with local suppliers.
And they need to be able to report it to the government.
And they need to be able to report
the
back.
company that I was in, we had to report to the government because we'd taken TARP money. So this was 10 years ago. We had no way of actually understanding where our spend was.
Yeah. The sustainable spend, we haven't seen as big of a demand yet in the print category. Our tool is global, so we have a pretty large user base in Australia and the UK. And we've seen in the UK, sustainable spend is huge.
Right.
It's like a mandate, and it's part of their process. So we're hoping...
It's interesting like how the political element of climate change affects the way that the importance of sustainability in organizations in certain locations. Hence why we're still playing catch up in the US, I think.
And we think we'll see a shift or a larger transition in the sustainable space in the next few years within the category. And then diversity spend, our tool tracks and manages union, veteran, female, and minority. We're looking to expand that and add some more categories as well. And that's really hit or miss. Some of the larger Fortune 1000 companies, it's a requirement or mandate, and that's more important. We're seeing some smaller organizations putting that on the roadmap as maybe 6 or 12 months out. So we think it's important to offer that as an option if a company does want to start tracking and managing that.
And it's also geographic again. On the flip side of the sustainability in the US, that's very important. In other locations, that kind of information isn't tracked with as much interest.
And then I would say the other kind of important piece of the software and tool is data. Where we go to lots of conferences and events, and it's just such a huge topic. And print is a very, very decentralized category in many organizations. And one of the big challenges is people don't know where to start. They have all the different departments doing their own thing, and they don't even know who the suppliers are or what the spend is.
And what they're buying. We talked about the niches before. There's no real way of understanding whether you're buying a particular niche from a particular supplier.
So, other than going to AP and saying, run a report
looking at the invoices.
And looking at the invoices, there's really not an easy way oftentimes for organizations to really understand what their spend is. So having a software solution that not only manages the bidding and procurement piece of it, but also gives the visibility and insight into the spend and data, we feel is really, really important to companies. So we have many online live reports in many different categories. Also tracking supplier performance is part of our tool. So it lets you know how your print suppliers are performing over time with several metrics. And then, of course, the savings metric, where value is important, but still, this day and age,
savings is the ROI.
People are measured on savings. So we feel it's very important in our tool to provide a savings metric. So we actually capture and track the savings on every single job. So our formula, we take the difference between the bids selected and the average of the 4 other bids.
Okay.
Some organizations have their own way.
Yeah, I'm sure some, whether you can claim cost avoidance, whether it's hard savings, whether there's a baseline, all that goes into the calculation.
So we will, if companies have their own formulas, we're happy to configure and use those. One of the questions we always get is, well, why don't you just load all of our current pricing and compare it against the actual? Well, in print, most print jobs change. So what you ran last time is not what you're producing this time. Yeah. So your specs and quantities change, therefore you can't compare it to the historical.
It's harder to baseline, right?
So we always coach and talk with buyers about that because we feel it's very important to have accurate, measurable data.
And how much of an influence do external factors like the price of paper have on your print costs? So it's something that's not necessarily controllable.
Yeah, I would say the paper is the biggest factor in print cost. Yeah. So right now, it's a huge challenge because there's been a significant increase in paper cost.
I want to talk a little bit about the kind of you had, before you talked about when you started your career, it was more an outsourced model that's more people oriented. We've talked about technology and using software to kind of automate some of that process. Yeah. What's the balance between technology and the human element in terms of managing your print spend?
So it's a huge factor. It's a huge element. Marketing teams are very used to working with someone, being able to send an email, pick up a phone, have someone come into the office. So it's a very important balance of implementing and using software, but also having that personal touch and connection. And a big challenge we always hear from marketing is, they already know all my information. They know what type of paper we want, or how are we going to innovate? How are we going to know what the new equipment is, what the new paper stocks are? So it's very important to have a combination. You can't just say, here's a software solution and just run with it. You have to have a people component as well.
Right. I want to finish up because I know that we're coming against time to actually talk about something that's pretty refreshing to me, and it's the fact that you're actually creating a magazine for procurement professionals. And I say it's refreshing because, back 15, 20 years ago, this is when I was in the UK, we'd always look forward every month, the magazine about procurement landing on our desks. It's something you could actually read. And of course, as everything becomes digitized, that all goes away, where there isn't something you can put in your hands and read like a magazine. So I was just really intrigued as to hear that you're actually going and creating a real magazine again. I was just wondering if you could share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we're really excited about it. So one of our beliefs at RSN is we want to provide thought leadership and really good content and information to people in procurement. And my dad is a writer. And so I've grown up around very creative people and people who like to write. So I've always used writing as a medium to market and to provide useful information. So our team got together and we launched a magazine called Procurespective. Okay. We have a really fun team of writers and editors and designers. And right now it's quarterly. So we are actually getting ready for our last edition for the year to go out. And it's an actual printed magazine, which I know is rare and hard to believe. But it actually physically mails. So we're sending it out to about 1,500 people today in the procurement space. And then we also just launched a newsletter. Okay. So we will send out the magazine, and then a few weeks later, we'll also send out a digital version with links to the articles. And one of the things we really try to do is use humor in our writing. So life is stressful, procurement is stressful, and I think it's really important to laugh at ourselves and have fun sometimes. So we find really interesting, kind of innovative people at all levels in procurement in an organization, whether it's someone's first month, whether they've been in the industry 5 years, whether they're a CPO. So all different types of organizations, different types of buyers, different types of personalities. And we do interviews and we ask kind of really fun, unique questions. And then we write articles, and we always try to have them themed. So we find that to be kind of fun and interesting as well. We've got a really cool design team that kind of plays on that. And then we always have an outside contributor. So Omer from the Smart Cube wrote a piece for us, and Jamie Crump, who's a consultant with a long background in diversity spend, she just wrote a piece for us as well. And so we really like to also include outside experts to promote and talk about thought leadership and things that are important to them.
No, it's I've seen a couple of copies of that you've put out there, a couple of the I want to say episodes, but that's me in my podcast world. But I look forward to continue to see that, because I think it's great to actually see something a little bit. It's funny to say a magazine is something a little bit different, isn't it? Given the fact that, for I don't know how many decades that was the de facto way of communicating.
I know, and given that we're in the print world, we figured we should actually print and send something to people.
Right. Well, where can listeners go if they're actually interested in finding a little bit more about that?
So if you go to our website, rsnetwork.com, and click on the magazine tab, it will bring you directly to our magazine. We post all of our current articles, and there's also a way to sign up if you'd like to either receive the newsletter or the physical copy as well. Okay,
and if listeners are interested in connecting with you directly after the interview, where would be a good place for them to find you?
LinkedIn. So shoot me a note. You can also get my cell phone and email off LinkedIn as well, and I'm a texter, an emailer, or on social media.
All right. Well, I'm going to include links to your LinkedIn profile, but also to your website and to the magazine on our show notes today. Those are going to be at artofprocurement.com/RSN. That's artofprocurement.com/RSN. So, Sarah, just thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Phil. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Hi there. I want to thank you for tuning in to today's podcast. You can check out all of our back catalogue at artofprocurement.com/podcast. where you can also subscribe to our newsletter to make sure that you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's show, I'd love if you would tell a peer, or perhaps go and rate and review by going to artofprocurement.com/review. Word of mouth really is the best way to help the podcast grow, and if you're able to do either one of those things, I would truly appreciate it.